Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sandra Morgan from the College of Arts and Sciences here at Kent State University, and I'm pleased to serve as moderator for this conversation, which is a part of our series, Jews Around the World. Today's conversation explores the Jewish communities of Ethiopia in Africa and in Israel. Before I make introductions, I'd like to remind you that your microphones are muted, but not your voice. We look forward to excellent conversation and insightful questions, which I will present at the end of the speaker's presentation. As a reminder, to ask a question, please select the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and type it there. You can also join the conversation in the chat section. And as always, I know that you will ask questions that are courteous, productive, and on topic. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jacob Lebens, our program partner and the Director of Judaic and Holocaust Studies at Youngstown State University, followed by Chaya Kessler, Director of Jewish Studies here at Kent State University, and my good friend. Dr. Lebens?
Hi, everybody. I just would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Center for Judaic and Holocaust Studies at Youngstown State University, to thank my partners at Kent State University and our sponsors at the Youngstown Area Jewish Federation. We could not have put this together without this wonderful collaboration. And I want to welcome, of course, Dr. Galia Sabar, who is joining us from Israel today. Thank you very much. I'm glad to see so many of you here.
Thank you, Jacob and Sandra, and welcome Galia Sabar, all the way from Israel. My name is Chaya Kessler. I'm the Director of Jewish Studies at Youngstown State University, and it's truly a pleasure to be partnering with Youngstown State, where we have a joint topic to pursue. So our topic, as Sandra said, is Jews around the world, and today we're concentrating on Ethiopia, the long journey, Jews in Ethiopia, the long journey to Zion. Again, I also want to thank our underwriter for this series, the Youngstown Area Jewish Federation, generously supporting us. I want to say a brief introduction to Galia Sabar, not to take anything from her time. She's a leading scholar in migration and African studies in Israel. Her publications include 5 books, 3 edited volumes, and over 45 articles in academic journals. One of the themes of her research has focused on Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia and Israel. Beyond her scientific work, Professor Sabar is an activist in several Israeli international NGOs. I will not mention them all, there's so many. All these activities are part of her endless efforts to translate academic knowledge into social activism and bring about real change in the social and political realms in Israel. Professor Sabar has been granted several local and international awards, again, too numerous to mention. However, I will mention, above all, for her work that combined academic excellence and social action. She received the Unsung Heroes Award, granted by the Dalai Lama in 2009. Together with Ofer Schechter, she's raising their 5 children and grandparenting 1 currently. Currently, she is the president of Rupin Academic Center, one of the leading colleges in Israel. And Galia, also, of course, she is a very good friend. So I'm very proud to present Galia Sabar.
Thank you very much for the warm words, Chaya, and thank you very much for Kent University and Youngstown University for hosting me. And it's a wonderful opportunity not to have to hop on a plane and suffer from jet lag and just be with all of you today. So let me start by sharing a short, I would like to, okay, now just let me know if you can see it well. Okay, yep. Great. So the topic, as you probably read, is Ethiopian Jews, the long quest for Zion. And Chaya has said a few words about myself. And then she said, for the last 5 years, I'm the president of Rupin Academic Center, which is the first public college in Israel. And it was established in 1949, a year after the State of Israel was established. And it looks like a kibbutz, and it resembles very much an agricultural settlement because it's located in the heart of Israel, where the Jaffa oranges were grown years and years ago, and we're still very proud of being kind of preserving the historical uniqueness of our college in the midst of the very, competitive academic world of Israel and the world at large. One of the unique things, and that would be the last thing that I would say about Rupin, is that we have a marine science college on the shores of the Mediterranean. So if any one of you is interested in marine biology or migration studies, you're more than welcome to visit us. So as you saw, the topic is Ethiopian Jews, the long quest for Zion. But I have to share with you that I really had a dilemma regarding the topic, because a topic has to, in a way, like hint, where am I going to be in this talk and what is the context? And I thought about maybe Ethiopian Jews between Ethiopia and Jerusalem, the journey, or between fame and misery, or maybe Ethiopian Jews between achievements and failures, between being nice to being violent, or Ethiopian Jews between being Jewish and being converted, or between led to being leaders. And as you know, we chose the long quest for Zion, but all these subnames and subtopics you will see are going to be interwoven into my talk today. Now, the context is obviously historical, but also very, very recent. And there's, before we dive into it, I just want to make sure that we all know the geographical context that we are speaking about. So I just wanted to show the map of the African continent. And on the lower bottom right side, you can see the Horn of Africa, where Ethiopia specifically is located. So it's in the eastern part of the African continent. And you can see that it is relatively not too far from the state of Israel. And you know that the African continent and Israel are connected via the Sinai Desert, via the state of Egypt. So we are actually in the same region, but there is a world of difference and many, many borders and obstacles on the long way from Ethiopia to Zion or to Israel. So this is the geographical context. Where is Ethiopia located? Where is Israel located? And Ethiopia is a very, very important state within the 54 states of Africa. And the Jews within it are a very small minority. And here we're going to talk about them being a minority in Ethiopia and then coming to Israel and being a minority within the state of Israel. So this is the geographical context. And although I will go back in history, thousands of years ago, I did wanted to mention three major milestones or historical milestones, 1984, 2015, and 2021, because we are actually going to really end this talk with what is happening with Ethiopian Jews while we are talking in Israel today. So let me go to 2015. 2015, May 3rd, is one of the largest and most emotional and shocking events. Was a huge demonstration organized by Ethiopian Jews in Israel, young and old, those who were born in Ethiopia and those who are third generation in Israel, joined by a few non-Ethiopian Israelis in the heart of Tel Aviv, thousands of them calling to stop racism against Black Jews in the state of Israel. Angry and frustrated youngsters walked the streets of Tel Aviv, blocked the main roads, hours and hours of traffic jam, calling for a change in the Israeli government policy towards Ethiopian Jews, calling to stop police violence against young Ethiopian Jews, stop racism, stop police violence, the signs said. Another one said, I'm Black, but transparent in the eyes of society. And then obviously paraphrasing Martin Luther King's famous quote, I have a dream that one day my 4 children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by their personality. So the demonstration was really extremely important, moving, shocking for many, many non-Ethiopian Israelis, for white Jewish Israelis and others. And a lot of people said, what went wrong? Why in 2015, several dozen years after the majority of Ethiopian Jews came to Israel, this demonstration was organized? What went wrong in this quest for Zion, in this coming of this unique Jewish community from Africa to the state of Israel? But they were not only demonstrating against police violence and brutality and maybe state orchestrated direct or indirect, implicit or explicit racism, but they were also crying and calling the attention for inner violence within their own community. And between 2015 and 2020, 25% of women killed by their spouses were Ethiopian women. And if we look at the percentage of Ethiopian Jews within the total population of the state of Israel, they're 2.2%. So what went wrong? Why is there so much inner domestic violence? Why is there so much violence surrounding the community, violence inflicted on them by the police, by others? So that is Ethiopian Jews between misery and coming to Israel. So this was 2015, and that truly is a milestone in the history of Ethiopian Jews in Israel, protesting, stopping what is called to be nice and submissive and quiet, and crying out against their own situation. Now, obviously, this is not the entire picture. This is not everything that we can say about Ethiopian Jews. And as I said, today is a special day because we have general elections. They're now going out. And if I wasn't talking to you, I would be out calling people to come to the ballot box and vote. And one of the leading candidates in the current Israeli government is the Minister of Absorption, Pnina Tamanu-Sheta, that was born and raised in Ethiopia. And she's one of 3 members of our parliament that are Ethiopian Jews. And if I said before, we have 120 seats in parliament. So we have 3 members of parliament, and Ethiopian Jews are only 2.2%. So we can see that Ethiopian Jews did find their way into leading political roles, and that is truly a great achievement for them as people, as individuals, and for the entire community. And I just brought one other, the first medical doctor amongst Ethiopian Jews. Both of them were born in Ethiopia, but raised in Israel. So I know that your series is dealing with Jews around the world, but I wanted to ask the question, why Jews of Ethiopia and why me? Obviously, if you look at me, I'm not directly related to Ethiopian Jews, but in many ways, my first journey to Ethiopia, which I will share with you in 1982 and 1983, really shaped my entire academic career, and in many, many ways, my personality, my being, my social activism, and so on. So why Ethiopia? Well, other than Jews of North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and other countries in the northern part, and a very, very young, relatively young Jewish community in the Republic of South Africa. There were no known Jewish communities in between. So we have North Africa, we have South Africa, but in what is called Sub-Saharan Africa, there were no Jewish communities. So that is the reason that I chose to talk about the Jewish community in Ethiopia and its uniqueness, and we will see in a few minutes. And why me? As I said, in 1982, I was approached by, I was an undergrad student at Tel Aviv University. I did my undergrad studies in Middle East and African history. And I was approached by a tourism company, and they said, listen, there's a group of North American and Canadian Jews who are really interested in seeing what is going on in Ethiopia. They heard about the Jewish community, and there is a war now in Ethiopia. We want to see their situation and to see if we can help in any way. And because you studied African studies, you know Ethiopia, you speak English, so maybe you can come and be our guide. So I said yes. It was a great opportunity for me as an undergrad student, and it was good money at the time. And little did I know that it was actually a cover story. And soon after I said yes, I was approached by the Israeli government, and I was asked to take a very, very minor role and a small part in what later became the famous Operation Moses, an operation to bring about the Jews from Ethiopia via Sudan to Israel, with a very active part of the Mossad and other Israeli agencies, with a very, very strong support of the North American and Canadian Jews. So from my first visit to Ethiopia in 1982 up to 1984, in less than 2.5 years, I went to Ethiopia 22 different trips, going in and out, bringing information to the Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia about the long journey to Israel and what is and who is expecting them in the state of Israel, and bringing back information to the state of Israel about what's going on in Ethiopia, the difficulties, the challenges that the Ethiopian Jewish community is facing. And as we're approaching Passover in 3 days now, I thought it's symbolic to share with you a picture of Ethiopian Jewish women preparing the special Passover bread, the matzah, which is called kita in Amharinia, and really taking all the needed measures of preparing this special bread and keeping the time not to let the bread rise, and all the other Jewish regulations concerning Passover. And for me, as it was like the first encounter with Black Jews in Africa, it was a very, very moving moment. And I think that you can see on the right side, there's one woman who's preparing the dish itself, and the other one is holding a book. And we brought with us the prayer book that we read over the Seder dinner, the Haggadah of Passover. And she was looking at it, and it was a Haggadah that was written both in English, Hebrew, and Amharinia. And it was the first time that they saw this special book in the 3 languages, and it was a very, very moving moment. This was 1983, and we're focusing now on Ethiopian Jews, but Ethiopians were part of the state of Ethiopia. And those years were horrific years in the history of independent Ethiopia. These were years of a civil war, an extremely violent, vicious war within the various fractions of the state of Ethiopia that then was conquering what is now Eritrea. It was one state. And the civil war erupted after the downfall of the last Emperor Haile Selassie, and he was overthrown by a military coup led by Mengistu Haile Mariam. And the the military conflict was so horrific that I think that for the world, it was one of the first time where scenes from the famine of North Ethiopia were broadcasted by CNN. That was then a very young challenge to the entire world. And people were really devastated from seeing what is happening in Ethiopia that was always so famous for being, you know, a unique state within the African continent. So when we speak about trying to reach out Ethiopian Jews at the beginning of the 80s, we have to remember that it was within a war, a civil war. So even for the American Jews, the Canadian Jews, other NGOs that were helping, for people from Israel that came to Ethiopia, and first and foremost for the Ethiopian Jews themselves, it was a very, very difficult time to live and to obviously try and create a better future for themselves. And these were the years where the Israeli government was really trying to help those Ethiopian Jews that opted to leave Ethiopia and come to Israel. Now, they couldn't do it via Addis Ababa, the capital, via, you know, a regular flight, because it was forbidden for Ethiopians to leave Ethiopia in those years. So they had to sneak from Ethiopia, and they did it by foot in a very, very dangerous and courageous journey from Ethiopia to Sudan, to the shores of the Red Sea. And in Sudan, they were there within special refugee camps. And that's where representatives of the state of Israel were there waiting for them. And many of them were brought via the Red Sea with the assistance of the Israeli Navy, and others were brought on planes via Sudan to Israel. These 4 years between 1980 and 1984 were later known as Operation Moses. It was a secret operation. The state of Israel was trying to keep it secret under the international radar, so not to evoke the Ethiopian government to block the way of Ethiopian Jews. About 30,000 men, women, and children, Jews mainly from North Ethiopia, left Ethiopia to Sudan. About 5,000 of them died en route or in the refugee camps. And this is one of the stories of Jewish history that is not yet well researched, talked about, published, and celebrated. It's just recently that the Ethiopian Jewish community is really commemorating those heroes that died en route and the heroes that made it to the state of Israel. So this was the first migration wave of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. It's the main one, it's the most known one, most glorified one, but many others did not come up to 1984 and were stuck in Ethiopia on their way to Sudan, or in the refugee camps in Sudan, or in their villages back in Ethiopia. So between 1984, when Operation Moses stopped, up until today, 2 additional migration waves occurred. One was called Operation Solomon, exactly 10 years after Operation Moses, with 30,000 Ethiopian Jews coming via Addis Ababa. That was already a new regime in Ethiopia. There were direct flights to Israel. It was a completely different story than Operation Moses. And in the past 20 years or so, there are groups of Ethiopian Jews coming to Israel, and I am calling them Ethiopian Jews, although many of them have over the years converted to Christianity, and we'll speak about it a little bit later. Even about 2 weeks ago, 300 Ethiopian Jews came to Israel, and within the corona pandemic, with all the complications of bringing people from Ethiopia to Israel, But this commitment of the state of Israel and of the Jewish community that is already in Israel to bring their brothers and sisters is still ongoing and very strong. So this is the historical context. So we started with 2015, we went back to 1984, and now today, 2021, there are about 200,000 Ethiopian Jews who live in Israel. The total population of Israel is about 9 million. So it's really a very, very small group within this mosaic of the Jewish peoplehood within the state of Israel. But it's very unique and very significant. And we have to say, this is the only Black Jewish community that we have in the state of Israel. It's the only Black community that holds Israeli passports, citizenship, and are full Israeli citizens. So I know for Americans, it's part of the American multicultural, multiracial, but in Israel, definitely in the early 1980s, when the first Ethiopian Jews came to Israel, it was something different. It was something that was a challenge. And it's something that did evoke, on the one hand, a lot of empathy and happiness and joy that a lost tribe of the Jewish people is coming to Israel, but it also arose other feelings of who are they, questioning their Judaism, how can we have Blacks as Jews coming to us? So these are all questions that are extremely important in our talk, because one of the first things that we have to ask is, why are there so many names when we speak about Ethiopian Jews? And I particularly chose to say and continuously say Ethiopian Jews, although some call them Beta Israel, which is the people of the house of Israel, and others call them Falasha, which is a term that they dislike. It's a term that was created for them by the Christians in Ethiopia in the 16th century. So they're very various names. And I think that especially you Americans know how important it is the names that you choose, the terminology that you choose to use. And it's never, it's always has ideological background and a political meaning behind it. So we're going to see who are the Ethiopian Jews and when did they first arrive in Ethiopia, what is so unique about them as a Jewish community, and what are the similarities to other Jewish communities around the world. All these are really important questions when we're looking at Ethiopian Jews. So one of the first questions that we have to ask is, what are the origins of Ethiopian Jews, or how did Jews come to the African continent, to the state of Ethiopia? So within the academic research, there are two main hypotheses, okay? The first one is that Ethiopian Jews are actually part of a larger group of Jews around the world, or the Jewish peoplehood. And at one point in history, Jews migrated to Ethiopia and created a Jewish community, including converting the locals. The second hypothesis is that Ethiopian Jews are actually local Ethiopians that at one point in history have converted to Judaism. Now, look for a moment at these two hypotheses. They're very, very different. The first one clearly said that Ethiopian Jews are part and parcel from the larger Jewish peoplehood, from the core, from the heart of the Jewish peoplehood. And the other one says that they're locals that opted to convert, okay? Now let's look at the first hypothesis. And here we have various stories, or I would say myths, okay? The first one is the most famous one and a great one, that Ethiopian Jews are directly connected to King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Now, you all know King Solomon, the smartest man on earth, the richest one, the one that had so many women, and he built the temple in Jerusalem. And Queen Sheba, she was known to be the strongest leader of the Horn of Africa. She was a woman queen, extremely rich and smart and witty, and they knew about each other. And King Solomon invited Queen Sheba to his temple in Jerusalem, and they extended gifts, and they extended proverbs and stories, and they probably also exchanged body fluids. And when she came back to Ethiopia, she was pregnant with a son of King Solomon. And she gave birth to their son and named him Menelik. And when he was 5 years old, Queen Sheba sent him, so the legend says, to the temple to be raised as a Jew, to be raised by his father, King Solomon. And when he learned Judaism and he learned how to rule, he went back to the kingdom of Shva, and he actually inherited his mother and became the founding father of the Jewish community in Ethiopia. Okay, now obviously this is a wonderful story. It's a story that says that the Jews of Ethiopia are directly related to King Solomon, that they're directly related to wisdom, to power, to this glorious history of Solomon and Sheba. The second story within the first hypothesis is that the Jews of Ethiopia are Jews who fled Jerusalem after the destruction of the first temple. The destruction of the first temple, obviously, we know that the Jews have scattered around the world, and a group of them went down south through Egypt, down south in the Nile, and settled in the highlands of Ethiopia. How do we know that at least this story has some historical evidence? Because the Jewish practice of Ethiopian Jews resembles the practice of Judaism during the first temple, and it does not have all the innovations and changes that happened during the second temple and mainly after the destruction of the second temple. So in a way, if we look at their Jewish ceremonies, practices, rituals, liturgic and so on, it is similar in many ways to what we know happened in Israel or in the land of Israel before the destruction of the first temple. The third story or narrative within the first hypothesis, as is in many ways related to the second, is that the Ethiopian Jews are sons and daughters of one of the lost tribes, and probably the tribe of Dan. Now, as historians, there are very, very, very few evidence supporting these three beautiful narratives. But for Ethiopian Jews, it really doesn't matter. For them, they are part and parcel from the heart of the Jewish peoplehood, from the core of the Jewish peoplehood. And you will see later when we will talk that that is the reason that they were so offended, upset, angry, that people tried to question and challenge their Jewishness. So this is the first hypothesis. The second one is that Ethiopian Jews are actually a group of Ethiopians that were Christians probably, or maybe Muslims, that converted to Judaism after meeting Jews that came from North Africa or Egypt, somewhere between the 6th and the 11th century AD. Now you can see that this hypothesis is so remote from the core of the Jewish people that it has to do with a local group that converted, and who knows what kind of conversion they went through. But from a scientific, historical point of view, this hypothesis is so much better grounded in scientific proving. There are so many linguistic similarities with the rest of the local population. There's so many social resemblance, especially the lower status professions such as blacksmiths that the Jews adopted because they were on the margins of society. And also a DNA tests that were done in the past 10 years with everything that we know about the danger of DNA that backs this, proving greater similarities with local populations than with Jewish people around the world. Now, whatever hypothesis you choose to hold, and as I said, most Ethiopian Jews and many others hold the first hypothesis, it's okay. You can become Jewish either by being born Jewish or being converted to Judaism, but for their self-esteem, for their self-identity, it's extremely important for the Ethiopian Jews, their origin. Now, all in all, when we look at Ethiopian Jews that were mainly concentrated in the northern part of Ethiopia, from early time that we have written evidence to the existence of this community, they always lived either in separated villages from the rest of the population, whether they were Christians or Muslim, or they lived in secluded areas within another village. They led a different lifestyle. They had their unique professions. And if we think of Ethiopia as being mostly a land of farmers, Ethiopian Jews from the 16th century were not allowed to own land. And they actually had to work as farmers for rent on Christian land. And they were called people who intrude the land or go into land which is not theirs. And in Amharinia, that is the term falasha, which has the Hebrew root of palash, someone who goes into a land which he doesn't own. And if you remember, I started by saying that falasha is a term that they dislike, and now you can understand why. The Jews of Ethiopia always kept very strict kosher rules and regulations. One of the unique features of Ethiopian Jews is that they had monks, and there's no other Jewish community around the world that has monks. And in this picture, we could see one of the Ethiopian Jewish monks. And if we looked at their scripts, at their written rituals and written holy scripts, they had the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, which they called the Orit. So these were the unique features of Ethiopian Jews within the general population of Ethiopia. When we look at Ethiopian Jews, or the main feature of Ethiopian Judaism, and I know that this series of lecture really takes you around the world, and you do look at Jewish communities in a comparative perspective. So as I said before, the religious literature has the Torah, the 5 first books of the Bible, and they have external books that most Jewish communities don't keep as part and parcel of their Bible. So they have the book of Yovlot and the book of Hanoch that we all know, but were not included in the Bible. And they have 2 external books that are unique to Ethiopian Jews, and they are the only community around the world that holds them. It's the Aradat and Tazaza Sanabat. And those of you who can just a little bit hear the Semitic root of Sanabat, it's the Shabbat, okay, the holy day of the Jews. So they had a specific book that had all the rules and the regulations concerning the Shabbat. So this was the parts that were common and similar to other Jewish communities, and the ones that were unique. In terms of holidays and festivals, the Jews of Ethiopia knew all the rituals the Jewish people celebrated prior to the erection of the Second Temple. So for example, they have Passover and Pentecost, Shavuot, and the Rosh Hashanah. but they didn't celebrate Hanukkah, they did not celebrate Purim, because these were later holidays and celebrations that were added to Judaism. However, there is one unique holiday that only Ethiopian Jews celebrate, and that's the Sigd. That's the day that commemorating the brit between the covenant between God and his people, and they celebrated 7 weeks after Yom Kippur. And on the left-hand side, you can see Ethiopian Jews celebrating it in Ethiopia, and on the right-hand side, you can see the religious leaders of the Ethiopian Jewish community celebrating it in Jerusalem. So I think that now you get a more holistic picture of Ethiopian Jews. How did Jews come to be in Ethiopia? Where has a first Jewish Black community started in the African continent, and a little bit about the uniqueness and the similarities of the way Ethiopian Jews practice their Judaism. Now, before we go on a little bit to history, how the Jews of the world discovered the Jews of Ethiopia, I want to say 2 general comments. One is that, as you all know, as I said before, you can either join the Jewish people by being born to a Jewish mother or by conversion. That is one very known fact. The other is that within Judaism, in the past and today, there were always various streams and sects and cults and groups. There was never, ever one homogenic Judaism. In spite of what people are trying to say, this is not true Judaism, or this is just a partial Judaism, or they're trying to downgrade conservatives or reforms or whatever. It has never been in the entire history of the Jewish people that there was one Judaism. And in many ways, Ethiopian Jews are challenging all those who are trying to create one uniform Judaism. And they're really trying to maintain their uniqueness, and this celebration of Sigd, and the fact that they continue to celebrate it within the state of Israel after they came here, 3 generations after they came here, really signifies a very, very strong feature of Ethiopian Jews, that they're Jews and Ethiopian. And they're not giving up either size of their unique hyphenated identity. Now, when did we, people outside of Ethiopia, hear about Ethiopian Jews? And I am definitely putting an emphasis about when did we hear about them, because they were there before, but we didn't acknowledge them. So the first written evidence is from a local, very, very known Egyptian rabbi who acknowledged the existence of a Black Jewish community in Ethiopia. Now, when the Radbaz actually gave them the kosher statement that there were Jews, it was really the first time that non-Ethiopians, Jews, acknowledged the Jewish community, spread out the word about their existence. In the 18th century, European Jews reported about a unique Black Jewish community, but they were more suspicious than the Egyptian Jewish community, and there were reports about them, and it really rose the interest mainly of researchers. But one Ethiopian Jew, Daniel ben Hamadia, in the midst of the 19th century, made the long journey from Ethiopia via Egypt to Jerusalem. And upon his return to Ethiopia, he really brought with him the news of other Jews, of white Jews, to the Jews of Ethiopia. The turn of the 19th century, research started about, or scientific research within the European academia, mainly in Germany. There were 2 very famous professors, Halevi and Faitelovich, And they came by the turn of the 19th century, the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century to Ethiopia, sat with Ethiopian Jews, wrote about them, documented them, took pictures. And that is actually the first and most systematic archive that we have of Ethiopian Jews that was done by external researchers. And that's really important to remember. In 1930, a group of 20 Ethiopian Jews was sent from Ethiopia to Europe, mainly to Germany, to learn Judaism. And maybe I should have wrote it to learn Judaism because they knew Judaism. They were Jews, but they were sent to learn the proper Judaism, the German Ashkenazi Judaism, the Judaism that was the rule in Western and Eastern Europe. And it wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a dialogue between the Ethiopian Jews and the German and European Jews. It was a one-way relationship where the white European Jews said to the Ethiopian Jews, you have your tradition, but that's not the Judaism. Adopt the normative Judaism, and that's when you will be accepted to the Jewish peoplehood. And these 20 youngsters returned home. And in fact, from 1930, 40 onwards, we see a split within the Ethiopian Jewish community. Those who tried to imitate the normative rabbinical European Judaism, and those who tried to keep their own Ethiopian Jewishness. And this mingle or the dialogue that developed within Ethiopia is probably one of the most interesting historical and Jewish studies related topic that still has a lot to look into. In 1956, 40 young Ethiopian Jews make Aliyah, they migrate to the state of Israel, and they are the first founding fathers and mothers of the modern Jewish community within the state of Israel. And as we said before, the first massive migration, massive Aliyah to Israel was in 1984. Now the Jews came, we saw, in the 1930s and 1950s, but were they acknowledged by the state of Israel as being Jews? The answer is no, until 1973. So you see, for hundreds of years, there was a talk about the Jewish community there in Africa. There was research done on those Black Jews of Ethiopia, but there was no official recognition of the state of Israel until 1973. Now, let me open these big brackets and say one important thing about the significance of the acknowledgement of the state of Israel of being a Jew. According to the law of return, that is one of the first laws that the state of Israel created in 1951, a Jew, wherever he lives around the world, has the right to migrate to Israel and upon arrival receive Israeli citizenship with all the benefits that goes with it. An immediate acceptance as citizenship. The only thing is that you have to be acknowledged as a Jew. And that raises the question, who is a Jew? So up until 1973, the Ethiopian Jews were struggling that the state of Israel will recognize them as Jews and that they will be entitled to make Aliyah, to come as migrants to the state of Israel. But they were not, because they were different, because their Jewishness was lacking, because they had these unique ceremonies, because they were Black. All these reasons prevented the rabbinical institution of Israel to acknowledge them being part of the Jewish people. So it was only in 1973 that the Sephardic Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, recognized them, and 2 years later, the Ashkenazi rabbi followed. So now you can ask me, since 1973, they're recognized as Jews. So why are there any issues still with them? Why are they talking about racism? Why is their Jewishness still challenged and confronted? So it's really, it goes down to two major questions that are still bubbling and burning and relevant in present day Israel. Who is an Israeli and who is a Jew? Now we can go to the legal definition. An Israeli is someone who holds an Israeli passport. And who is a Jew? That's more difficult. Is someone that was converted in a rabbinical court in Ohio be considered a Jew in Israel? Not necessarily, probably not, unless he was converted by a specific rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi in a well-known community in Ohio, and even then, I'm not sure. Let alone if he was converted by a Reform Jew rabbi in New York. So who is a Jew is a major, major question. Is his mother Jewish? Is his father, his great-grandfather? But who is an Israeli? Are people born to migrant laborers after they've been in Israel for 25 years, raised in the state of Israel, although their parents came from the Philippines or Thailand or China, went through the Israeli system, they're here all their life, they only speak Hebrew, their entire identity is Israeli. Are they entitled to be Israeli? So these are really, really major questions that if you want to understand the state of Israel of today and the Jewish peoplehood and the relationship between Israel and the larger Jewish peoplehood, you really have to confront these questions. And when we speak about who is an Israeli, then issues of race, social status, of segregation, of integration come up. For example, up until today, young Ethiopian Jews born and raised in Israel would not be accepted at some of the public schools within religious neighborhoods of Israel because their Israeliness and their Jewishness is challenged. And although it's against the law, and although the school has to accept them because it is a public school, still these issues are relevant. In 1984, when Ethiopian Jews made this heroic journey to Israel, in their worst nightmares, they could not foresee their Jewishness being challenged, their connection to Zion, to the core of the Jewish people. But that is truly the story of the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel. Because not only they were the first Blacks to arrive and be granted Israeli citizenship, they were the first Blacks to be acknowledged as Jews. So you can see, sorry, that this small community has really challenged both the concept of who is a Jew and who is an Israeli. Now, because this is an academic forum, I truly, speak with you not as a politician and not as someone who's trying to sell something, but based on what is happening. And although it's not always comfortable to hear it, but I think that the arrival of the Ethiopian Jewish community to Israel and to the greater Jewish community around the world forced all of us to rethink our own definitions and our own identities. And I don't think that the Ethiopian Jews wanted to carry this flag, okay? But they were forced into it. Now, you can ask me, but why was their Jewishness challenged if those rabbis in the 1970s acknowledge their Jewishness? Well, that's a great question, and I truly don't have a good answer for that. But that is the reality, that they were challenged. And when they arrived to Israel, the women were required to take a ceremonial dip in holy water, going into the mikveh, and the men were supposed to go through a ceremonial circumcision, okay, although they were all circumcised, in order to be accepted into the Jewish peoplehood. They protested, they were insulted, they were extremely angry, but they accepted it. These were the Jews that came in the first and second wave. However, since the turn of the 21st century, those who remained in Ethiopia, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them, are challenged even further, because at one point in history, they converted to Christianity, like the history of Jews in Spain during the times of the Inquisition in the 16th and 17th century. And we see this history of conversion in face of persecution, and they wanted to come back to Judaism. So they have to go through the full process of conversion, okay, not just a symbolic one. So you can see that this unique community, with all its similarities to the Jewish people, is still struggling on their religious identity, on their civic identity, on their pride, on their history, and on the place that they deserve within the Israeli society. Now, they're not the only group that is challenging the definition of who is a Jew. And I wanted to bring just one group, the Reform movement in Israel, that I'm a proud member of the Reform movement in Israel. And one of our struggles is not only to show that reforms are for Jews, but that women are equal to men within Judaism. And in an interesting way, the struggle of the Reform Jews and the struggle of Ethiopian Jews goes hand in hand with this large question of who is a Jew. Now, from the first small, quiet demonstration in 1984 that really came out because of this challenging of their Jewishness. And these signs are saying for rabbis, we are Jews. We are waiting for the unification with our families back home. Bring our brothers and sisters. Up until these demonstrations that just happened a few months ago, and you can see the very shocking use of the yellow star that is so much related to the Holocaust and what the Nazis did to the Jews in the concentration camps during World War II. And Ethiopian Jews in Israel, some of them really feel secluded and excluded from Israeli society. And this is something that we have to face, and we have to try and deal with it with respect and dignity to various forms of Judaism and being Israeli. One of the ways to bring about change is to support young Ethiopian Jews, both men and women, into higher education, and to try and open the gates to mobilization, social mobilization, economic mobilization. And this is one unique program that we created in our own college, that Ethiopian youngsters receive full scholarship. They do their bachelor's degree in whatever they choose, but they also go through an intercultural mediation course, and they're trying to mediate both within their own community, between the older generation and the new generation, but mainly between non-Ethiopian Jews in Israel and the Jewish community, calling to see them and consider them as equal to all other Israelis, regardless of differences that may be in the way that they celebrate their Judaism, in the color of their skin, in the history of their community. And their call is Ethiopians are different but equal. And I think that that is a slogan, an ideology, a value that we can all aspire to. And especially that is one of the main struggles that many of us in Israel are holding, to look at people that can be different but equal. Thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
Galia.
thank you very much.
It's fascinating. Fascinating, yes. It's such an important topic, and especially for us in America, we are dealing with the whole issue of black Jews, and also I feel remiss that I didn't mention the fact that we chose this topic for us for this month, because this is the Women's History Month, and I wanted to highlight Galia as an exceptional woman in this framework of things that are happening in our world. So I see that there are lots of people. I don't see questions, but if there's anybody who has a question.
Well, I think I'd like to lead off with a question or two, and that may spark some questions from others. Galia, your conversation was, as always, fascinating. It's always interesting to hear you speak, and your lectures are always so well planned and insightful. There were a few things in your conversation that struck me, and that I would like to I'd like to get your opinions on. So first of all, one of the things that I was really interested in was your question of who is a Jew and who is not a Jew, right? Who's Jewish and who's not Jewish. And if you're converted or born into into Judaism. So and this may be a frivolous and flip question, but if it boils down to even the rabbi that you study under and who brings you forward, then is anyone who converts really considered Jewish? Because it seems like there would be an awful lot of hoops to jump through. I know that it doesn't compare to Christianity, but if you're a Catholic or if you're not a Catholic, as long as you go through all of the processes, you're a Catholic and recognized as such worldwide. So if that is not the case in Judaism, I will bring to the table our good friend who is now in Miami, Ivanka Trump. If Ivanka Trump went to Israel and presented herself as a Jew, would she be accepted? Is she really Jewish?
Okay. Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. And I'm not going to answer on behalf neither of the rabbinical institution nor of the state of Israel. But I will say that there is there are two issues here. Who is a Jew and who is acknowledged as a Jew by the state of Israel that entitles him or her to get Israeli citizenship. So these are two separate issues. Ivanka Trump is considered Jewish, first of all, by herself, by the rabbis who converted her, probably by her own community. And if she comes to Israel, maybe because she's Trump's daughter, she will be an exception, but let's not look at that. She would not be acknowledged as a Jew who is entitled to get Israeli citizenship. Okay, so these are two separate issues. But in Israel, they're blended. In America, you can be converted by whoever is your rabbi, live as a Jew, see yourself as a Jew, and you don't care about the rules and regulations of the state of Israel, and that's perfectly fine. So what we find is that the Jewish peoplehood now becomes so much polarized on that specific issue.
Excellent.
Also,
So you know what? I
yeah,
knew
just
that this would open the door to questions. So I have a question from Mandy who says, if 23andMe says that a person is 98% Ashkenazi, what does that mean in your analysis?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If 23andMe said a person is 98% Ashkenazi, what does that mean in your analysis?
Okay, within the Jewish peoplehood, there's so many different sub-identities and subcategories, and Ashkenazi and Sephardic are just one of them. And I don't check anybody if he or she says he is X or Y. For me, that's it. I mean, I'm not checking further, asking for certifications and proof of, if that's what you say, if that's what you feel, if this is the kind of Judaism or ethnic leaning that you opt to have and celebrate, then it's yours.
I have one other question from William, and it says that essentially, there seems to be quite a bit of controversy around the Jewishness of Ethiopian Jews by some, even today. So why was there such a great effort by the state of Israel to rescue them from Ethiopia in the first place?
Excellent question. And that is one of the greatest frustrations that, first and foremost, the Ethiopian Jewish community has, but also all those who were involved in the various operations and efforts to bring the Jews to Israel. And it's not only with Ethiopian Jews. I think that it's a very natural worldwide phenomena that the natives are always threatened by the newcomers. And up until the newcomers melt into or find their own way or find their place, then they are challenged by the other wave of migration. So in that sense, that's not unique to the state of Israel. What is unique is that the state of Israel really went to such an extent and effort and to save and bring and rescue in heroic operations, that it's a huge question, and it's a great question. And some of the young Ethiopian Jews keep saying it very bluntly. Why did you bring us here? There we were A, B, C, and D, and here we are. And it's still a question. It's a burning question.
Interesting. Haya, I'm going to rely on you to ask the last question, because for some reason I can't see. I know that there were a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I can't, for reason I can't get to them. So if you would ask one last question, I think we will be in good shape. If you can.
So one of the questions that says, from Arthur, hi Arthur, says, what do you know about the Black Jews of Harlem?
Wow. Okay. I think that would be a great topic for another conversation.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very, very unique, rich community that is worth, a whole separate hour.
Yes. So the other question that's interesting by Victoria is asking, are there any non-Black Jews in Israel? Obviously there are. If yes, how are they treated in comparison to the Ethiopian Jews? In other words, other immigrants, I think that's what she's asking.
Okay. The vast majority are non-Blacks. Okay. And I'm specifically saying non-Blacks and not saying white, because there are many Jews that come from North Africa. Actually, there are about 50% of the Israeli population come from the North African country, from Egypt up to Tunisia and Morocco. So how would you consider them? How do they consider themselves? They don't consider themselves Blacks, but definitely they're different, or white, but they're very different than Jews who came from Eastern and Western Europe and the US and South Africa. So Israel, as I said, is a mosaic and a melange of very, very many ethnic groups and histories. However, the only group that defined itself as Black are Ethiopian Jews.
Yes, but I think the question is, if Israel is a mosaic, then why are the Black Jews singled out and put through all of this drama compared to the North Africans or any of the others?
That's the $1 million question, and I hope that I was able to bring about the challenges. I wish that wasn't an issue, but I think that in order to try and mitigate and resolve it, we first and foremost have to acknowledge it and to speak about it openly and frankly and without wish-washing what is happening. But as I said, we're voting today, and we have 4 candidates that are from the Ethiopian Jewish community that are probably going to be nominated into the Israeli parliament. And part of the change is that.
So there's a question by Matthew who says, have any political parties in Israel specifically made it part of their platform to advance the rights of Ethiopian Jews in Israel?
The answer is yes. They all made it part of their platform. The question is, will they deliver it? And there is a big difference between, pre-election and post.
Yes, sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
thank you so much. I just wanted to mention, Galia, thank you. And you touched upon so many topics that in my course, and I see many students from my course from the Intro to Jewish Studies, this idea of the law of return and who is a Jew, that applies to so many topics. We did not talk specifically about the Ethiopian Jews, but we definitely dealt with that in the context of talking about Jewish studies, anything, as well as in my women's class, we talked about the women of the wall. And I'm like, yes, I have a friend. Yes, and we did the Kol Be'isha and all the mikvah and all the different issues that are involved. So thank you, and I'm glad that there are so many. I don't know exactly who is there, but some of the questions came from our students, so that's fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
it was a great pleasure to have you speak today. I know that all of our guests enjoyed your lecture, and we will look forward to hearing from you again. And so on behalf of Kent State University, College of Arts and Sciences, and Youngstown State University, I thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to having you at our next and our final lecture, which Haya helped me here, will be in a couple of weeks, and will feature
Jews of Morocco.
That's right.
It
So,
will be on,
yes.
sorry, April 20th, featuring Alma Rachel Heckman speaking about the Sultan's communist, about how Jews sought for and achieved belonging in Morocco.
Thank you. I've lost all of my notes because I don't have my screen. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate your participation and your attention, and to our panelists, thank you again, and have a great afternoon.